This is the pattern 1851 Minié rifle, and it used to be the most advanced infantry weapon in the world. 170 years ago today, on November 5th, 1854, at the Battle of Inkerman, it earned a new nickname, the Destroying Angel. My P51 is an original and is one of perhaps a few dozen surviving P51 Minié rifles in the world. It is a 70 caliber rifle, or .702 to be exact, and shoots a bullet that weighs well over an ounce at about 800 grains. An ounce of lead sure kicks up a lot of dust in the backstop behind the target. The cool kids with their ARs were out in force at the range today, so sorry about all the rapid fire in the background, but it was very cool to shoot this rifle on the 170th anniversary of the Battle of Inkerman, where the Destroying Angel earned its reputation and probably changed the face of battle. So this bullet tumbled. You can see it tumbling in flight, and it keyholed at the edge of the paper. So you'll notice I've discovered how to record in slow motion through my spotting scope, and I think this is just the coolest thing ever. But here you can see the plug in the base of the bullet before it hits the target. I think that's just too cool, but I am a nerd.
Boy, when you see it being loaded, you know what they had to go through in the field years ago.
That was my last round of the day, and if you think this group isn't very good, then I hope you make a video with your own 170-year-old P51 Minié rifle and show me how it's done. Hi, I'm Brett from papercartridges.com. We're back here at the shop in beautiful downtown Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and it's no accident that we're doing this video today, so November 5th, 2024. And that's because on November 5th, 1854, so 170 years ago today, the Battle of Inkerman was fought in the Crimean War. And it is always a great day when I get to shoot and talk about one of my favorite rifles of this era, this absolutely iconic and revolutionary rifle. So this is the pattern 1851 Minié rifle. And of course, we just shot it. The shop still reeks of ballistol, but this gun, this 702 caliber monster of a rifle musket, you could almost say, I think a historian could really argue almost successfully that this gun ended the Napoleonic paradigm of battle. Or if it didn't end the Napoleonic paradigm, it definitely announced the start of the sweeping changes that were coming between the 1850s into the 1860s, where we see Napoleonic tactics replaced by a new paradigm that you could almost say we're still in today. So once soldiers give up the smoothbore musket and now they have rifles like these, rifles with sights, so you can aim them, your fire is predictable and your fire is effective out to several hundred yards. It's the same thing we have today. The only difference we have today, the modern M4s we're still carrying today, is they reload themselves and they're ballistically a lot superior, but it's still a rifle, so the bullet's still spinning, the soldier can still aim it. So we're still living kind of in the paradigm that this thing started. So the P51, it's got an awesome nickname that it got after the Battle of Inkerman. So it's sometimes called the Destroying Angel. But really one of my very favorite rifles that I shoot very rarely because it's it's one of very, very few surviving original P51s. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time covering the step-by-step, like phase-by-phase action of the Battle of Inkerman itself, because Rob over at British Muzzleloaders has done a much better job than I ever possibly could with his 5-part series on the Battle of Inkerman. So if you're interested in what happened today, 170 years ago, how the battle unfolded, all the uniforms, all the equipment, and of course he goes into a great deal of detail about the gun that had such an impact on that battle, the P51. Go over to British Muzzleloaders and check out his Inkerman Battle Series. I'll put a link down in the description. But we do have to give a little bit of background, just to give some context about what made this such a fantastically modern rifle. So let's go back to about, let's say, the status of battlefield tactics around 1850, so the early 1850s. You could still almost describe them as Napoleonic. So they're built around the infantry being armed with a smoothbore musket. So that's just firing a round ball. It bounces out down the barrel. Where it goes is where it goes. So that the fire of infantry with these muskets is effective to about 100 yards, maybe 150. Very, very rare you might fire out to maybe 200. Now there are rifles pre-1850, but the rifles are always on the periphery of battle. So they're given to specialized troops, they're given to like the sharpshooters, skirmishers, and they're fairly slow to load, and they're not all that accurate. So think of like the Baker rifle in the British Army, or the Brunswick, things like that. The Hall rifle in the U.S. Army in this era. So they exist, but the mass of the infantry, the rank and file, are still armed with the smoothbore. And things start to change in the 1840s. You get a couple developments with the Delvine and Touvenon chamber guns, where the soldier can now expand the bullet by ramming it really hard, either in a chamber or a pillar in the breech of the gun. And these work so. They're never adopted universally across any army, but you start to see more and more of them. And then, of course, Claude Minié shows up and he ruins everything around 1849 when he comes out with the game changer, and that is the Minié ball. So the original Minié bullet had an iron cup in the base, and you might wonder, why did they need to put an iron cup in the base? If you shoot rifle muskets today, if you shoot with the NSSA, for instance, or know anyone who does, obviously the bullets that we shoot today don't have these iron cups or plugs in them. So why did they go through all the time and trouble expense back then? And that's because the barrels and the bullets for these guns were not made to a consistent specification like we can today. So the barrel on this P51 Minié rifle was not made in a government factory. It wasn't made in a factory at all. It was made by a Birmingham gunsmith. And in the 1850s, that's how guns were made. There's usually not a government arms factory. There's a commercial trade, and they make guns after a pattern. And with a smoothbore musket, the barrels don't have to be perfect. It doesn't matter whether the barrel's like a 75 caliber Brown Bess. If it's a 7.59, who cares? It's a smoothbore. So when you first get rifles, and they're made by the same, you could almost call them cottage industry. The barrels vary widely in size, and Minié's iron cup was an assist to the bullet, forcing it to expand. So it adds like a mechanical wedge advantage inside the base of the bullet, and that will force it to expand a lot more than just a simple hollow base bullet that doesn't have an iron cup. So you need, in these first generation rifle muskets, so like early 1850s, you need these cups and plugs to give a helping hand to the bullet to get them to expand into barrels that could vary by as much as like 2/100ths of an inch. So it's 20 thousandths of an inch. So we start to see these new rifles. The Minié rifle appears, and the question is, are these things even worth it? Do we even want to go through the time and effort of training soldiers to use these things? Because a smoothbore musket is easy. You can teach a soldier to load and fire a Brown Bess in about 9 minutes. There's no real aiming involved. But once you get a rifle, all of the same shooting fundamentals that apply today, so sight picture, range estimation, your trigger squeeze, your breathing, all the fundamentals that make rifle shooting accurate today applied to a rifle back then, even more so because the bullet's trajectory is far more parabolic. And most of the European powers in the early 1850s, when the Minié rifle appears, like the technology's here, they know it's not for us. We really don't want these rifles because most European armies are conscript armies. So you draft these guys in your army, they serve for a few years, and then they're out. And there's no point in spending a year to train one of these conscripts how to shoot a rifle if he's just going to leave your army. But the British alone among the armies of Europe say, yes, we want a rifle. Now, the British Army has a volunteer, long-serving army, so it makes much more sense if you're going to have a soldier enlist in your army for 16 years. Yeah, it's a better return on an investment to train him to shoot a rifle. So the British copy the 1849 Minié rifle. They write a letter to France like, hey, could we please have some of these rifles? The French say, sure. They send them to England, and the English copy the French Minié rifle right down to the bullet too. So the bullet still had the iron cup. The British adopted in 702 caliber. That was because the Duke of Wellington, who was still commander-in-chief of the British Army in 1851, he said, in an emergency, this thing still has to be able to be loaded with the round ball for Brown Bess, which was about a 69 caliber. So they had to make the P-51 in 702. But all of the P-51 rifles that were made for the British military were made by commercial gun makers. So not a single one was made in a British government gun factory. And it took about 3 years for the commercial gun makers, almost all of them in Birmingham, to get these rifles built. So they adopt the pattern in 1851, and so it's 1854 before the P-51 rifles are actually being delivered to the government. So now they have these rifles, but if only there was a convenient war somewhere so we could see whether the rifle really will stand up in... Oh, look what's going on in the Black Sea. So after Russia destroys the Ottoman fleet in 1853, there's a panic in England and France that Russia is going to gobble up poor little Turkey, and they're going to gain access to the Mediterranean Sea, which obviously we cannot allow. And this is just about the only thing that can convince France and Britain to crawl in bed together and ally against Russia. So the French and the British send an expeditionary army, and they invade the Crimea. And the British troops are armed mostly with this gun, the pattern 1851 Minié rifle. So 3 out of the 4 divisions that the British Army sends to the Crimea initially have a rifle. And that's the first time, this is the first time that 3/4 of an army has ever been armed with a rifle. They also train on them. They start training up on these weapons on Malta when they were staging, and then they stage again in Bulgaria. And they're continually training to teach the soldiers, this is how you estimate the distance. You need to work on your sight picture, trigger squeeze, because this is all completely new to a regular old infantry line soldier to have to do any of these things that you didn't have to do with the old smoothbore. So French and British land their armies in Crimea. There's a couple early battles, the Alma and Balaclava. And the P-51 Minié rifle is early on very impressive in these early battles. And the Russians fall back to Sevastopol, and the war takes on a siege. So the French and British build siege lines around Sevastopol. And in November, the Russians, who are reinforced, they decide now is our chance to break out of the siege, and they launch on November 5th. They launch a massive assault on the British and French siege lines, focusing primarily on the thinner, weaker British side. So let's pause here and think about what battle looks like in 1854. So we're still in this Napoleonic paradigm. So the Russian troops are mostly conscripts. So they're armed with a conventional smoothbore musket. And the Russians plan for 1854, they plan a textbook conventional assault. So they're going to take large numbers of infantry, the same way Napoleon did, pack them into columns of these fairly poor quality conscript soldiers, and they launch these massive columns at enemy defensive positions. So the column will take casualties, that is accepted, but the calculus is an overwhelming number of guys with loaded muskets and bayonets are going to make it to the enemy position. The Russians also cleverly use ravines that kind of conceal a lot of their movement. And the morning of November 5th was also fairly foggy. So there's like banks of fog that are concealing some of the Russian movements. So the Russian assault made sense. They had numerical superiority, and the British lines that were being attacked were actually very thinly defended, poorly prepared, not really ready to receive a massive Napoleonic column assault. So by all the metrics of 1854, this Russian assault should have worked. And one big reason that it failed, not the only reason, but one big reason why this Russian assault absolutely failed, was the P-51 Minié rifle. Obviously, there were several other factors that led to the Russian attack not succeeding, but it is undisputed that the P-51 had a stunning effect firing on these Russian columns. So the British spot the Russian columns advancing from some distance. And Inkerman was a confusing, chaotic battle. Very few directives were issued by like commanding generals down to their soldiers on the British side. There was no time, it was too confusing. So these are small kind of company level actions. But when the British see these Russian columns coming, whenever they get a shot through the fog and the smoke, they open fire on these Russian columns from several hundred yards away at what was then unfathomably long range for infantry fire. So the Russian columns also make up a huge target. So you cannot possibly miss a target that is 30 yards wide and maybe 100 yards long with a division mass of infantry. And the bullets, 400, 500, 600 yards out from the British lines, the bullets start pelting these Russian columns. There are accounts of P-51 rifle bullets going through 2 or 3 Russian soldiers because they're so tightly packed into these columns. And the Russians that are moving up to advance, they're 600 yards away, so they're still advancing at basically a walk, and they're already taking this effective fire, and it utterly demoralizes the Russians. It also takes out, in rapid succession, 3 of the Russian commanders. So by not very long into the battle, no one even knows on the Russian side who is in charge. I mean, the generals are dead, and the colonels who stepped up to take command, they're dead too, shot down by rifle bullets at hundreds of yards away. Now, what we really need to emphasize here is that this has never happened before in battle. The Napoleonic paradigm that the Russians that morning, they marched into battle thinking this is how battle is fought. The enemy's infantry musketry fire can't hurt you until you get within about 100 yards. So once you get within about 100 yards, that's when you break into the charge, because a charging soldier can cross 100 yards in maybe 30 seconds. So the enemy only has time to get one shot off, and then you're on top of them. But these Russians are marching here in dense packed columns 500 yards away from the British, and bullets are ripping through them. So this is a shifting paradigm happening like before their eyes. It had never, this is not supposed to happen. And ultimately, several of the Russian columns do make it to the French and British lines, but they are repulsed with incredible acts of heroism from the British. So there's 20 Victoria Crosses awarded at Inkerman. And the Russians, who had taken such staggering losses, fall back to Sevastopol, and because of the power of the P-51 rifle, largely, they never make another attempt to break out of the siege. So it is strictly a defensive, hold our line against the besieging French and British after this point. And the world soon hears about what happened at Inkerman, this paradigm shift that's happening before their eyes, because there's a reporter embedded with the British forces on the Crimea. So he's one of the very first, what we would today call like a war correspondent. His name was William Howard Russell. And you might not be familiar with the name, but you're probably familiar with like the phrase "the thin red line." He wrote that about the British 93rd Highlanders standing a few weeks earlier at the Battle of Balaclava, and that, of course, that has become a an immortalized phrase. But he's still there. So Russell is still in the Crimea. The Battle of Inkerman happens, and he observes the battle, and in particular he observes the aftermath. So he goes out onto the field in the days after the battle, and he sees on the entire path that these Russian columns took, he is finding Russian casualties piled up, like strewn in heaps, in stacks, and hundreds of yards away from the British and French lines. So again, he's a war reporter. He's not new to this, but he has never seen this before. This is a new kind of carnage that that the world literally has not seen before this point. So he writes up his account and he telegraphs this out. And in 1854, it's only a matter of days before this is being reprinted in newspapers all across Europe and all over the world. And everyone is shocked by William Howard Russell's account of what the P-51 Minié rifle did at Inkerman.
But the Minié is the king of weapons. Inkerman proved it. The regiments of the 4th Division and the Marines, armed with the old Brown Bess, could do nothing with their thin line of fire against the massive multitudes of the Muscovite infantry. But the volleys of the Minié cleft them like the hand of the destroying angel, and they fell like leaves in the autumn before them.
Now, Russell borrowed the phrase "the destroying angel" from a Old Testament biblical account from 2 Kings, where an invisible hand of the destroying angel of the Lord comes down and just smites the enemies of Israel. So an invisible hand just takes them out. And Russell, seeing what the P-51 Minié rifle did at Inkerman, compared it to the hand of the destroying angel. There's nothing else he could reference, so he borrowed this supernatural language. The destroying angel probably be a pretty good name for a book, come to think of it. Which, of course, if you don't know, Destroying Angel, you can find it on Amazon for something like $10, where I go into like even more detail about the paradigm shift, the introduction of rifles. Real quick, we'll go over shooting the P-51. I did not have a very good, I did have a good day at the range. Like the shooting, I mean, it shot fairly well. The problem I had is it is early November in Pennsylvania, and if you go to a public range right now, everyone's getting ready for hunting season. So the range was packed, and I would take 1 or 2 shots, and then we would have to cease fire. So I fired 15 rounds, and it took me 3 hours to do that. So the group is okay. I mean, for a 170-year-old rifle, and the bore in this is pretty good, but the last maybe 12 inches of the bore, it's not deeply pitted, but it is kind of freckled. So in that most important part of the bore where the bullet is expanding and it needs to grip that rifling, it's not the best. The rest of the bore is pretty good. But I don't shoot this rifle much because it's it is a P-51 Minié rifle, and I'm terrified I'm going to crack the stock or do something to it. The military load was 2.5 drams of powder, which is about 68 grains. Now I load them down a little bit to about 60 grains of 1.5 Swiss. And I also use plugs, as the British did historically. I have shot them with not iron cups, but with brass cups that I painstakingly make and fit. I should have some pictures of what they look like here. But I decided to try something new and hopefully a little simpler today. So I actually shot them with wooden plugs. I can't notice any difference really between the two. I mean, the wooden plugs were driven forward, and again, the group is reasonable, I think, for a 170-year-old rifle with some dodgy rifling towards the breech. Of course, there was at least one tumbling bullet. That one, when I loaded that cartridge, a little bit of paper came out on the ramrod after I rammed it down. And what that means is I had ripped the bullet through the paper patch. And when that happens, that's never going to be an accurate bullet, even if it does manage to stabilize. So that wasn't surprising. But in spite of the long day, the barrel kept cooling down. So basically every other shot was back to a cold barrel shot. Hey, it still shot fairly well. The Destroying Angel, she still got it. That's within minute of Russian column easily all day long. You might notice the target at one point. So there were two really kind old gentlemen. One of them said he was 77, and they could not see their target. I don't know what they were shooting, some small bore, but even with their spotting scope, these guys couldn't see where they were hitting. And at one point, the wind blew off the reflective or the high visibility target. I just had stapled it up there. A gust of wind came, blew it off. And these guys were going down range like every 2 or 3 shots to see where they were going. And they went down there and saw my target laying on the ground. And so they picked it up, slapped it on their target. So that's why my high-vis target disappears midway through the shoot. And then they did realize what had happened, and then they apologized profusely. They came and gave me some of their targets, which they didn't have to do. It's a public range, and the day is coming, if God gives me the years, that I'm going to be just like them, not able to see the target. So all in good fun. But at the end of the day, we took the P-51 out, shot a fairly nice group in spite of everything. The wooden plugs worked great, and we got to do a hopefully this isn't too long. I have totally lost track of how long I've been rambling, but any day I can take the P-51 out and talk about it, for me, is a good day. So I hope this is useful to you. I'm told something else is happening today. I think like an election for dog catcher or something. But of course, the real important thing that's happening today, Tuesday, November 5th, is the 170th anniversary of a little-known battle from a little-known war that had a massive influence on infantry combat, and a game-changing, paradigm-shifting Destroying Angel really made her capabilities known. So I am Brett from Paper Cartridges. Again, I hope this was useful to you, and I will see you next time.